tarsus. Okay, and then the tarsus itself is held like a sling. So it's suspended like a sling via the canthal tendons and their attachments to the lacrimal crest, so anterior and posterior lacrimal crest medially, and to the lateral orbital tubercle on the opposite side. So the same process happens in the upper lid, although the area is wider and the tarsus is a little higher. So the superior septum arises from the superior arcus marginalis, a thickening of the periosteum of the rim, and it sweeps downward to cover the fat pads, and then it inserts on the upper border of the tarsus. So as we can see in the lower right photo, the orbital space can be completely sealed off. No? So when we examine our patients, like when we move the eyelids, we know that the tarsus and the septum are a little pliable to a certain degree. Like we can move the lower lid, the tarsus from side to side or up and down or even invert. When we examine, we do the tests for lid laxity or for andropion, sorry. But the sling configuration of the tarsi limits the displacement. So if you try, for example, on yourself, the forward distraction test or lateral distraction test, you can only move your eyelids a little distance, a short distance forward. So when the orbital contents increase, such as when there is a tumor or when there is inflammation, the globe and the adnexal structures have to move in order to make room for that new space-occupying lesion or whatever is causing the volume increase. So in patients with chronic, gradually progressive tumors, for example, like the patient on the left side, we can expect the eyelids to also gradually increase in size, and the bones will also remodel to accommodate the changes. So if you can see on the photo on the left, the palpebral fissure of this patient, the height and the length of the palpebral fissure is much increased compared to the normal side. And there's also expansion of the upper eyelid and even the brow. So on the corresponding CT, we see that the left orbit is wider than the right, and the lacrimal fossa is actually a little flattened compared to the right side in order to accommodate the growing lacrimal gland tumor. So in contrast, on the other side, we can see, so the patient on the left side just has increased volume of the orbital contents, causing globe displacement. So there's no compartment syndrome going on here. So this patient retained good vision and motility and normal intraocular pressure despite the marked globe displacement. However, in contrast, the patient on the right had rapid increase in content. So this patient on the right was a case of spontaneous retrobulbar hemorrhage. Some cases also, for example, of fulminant infection will present this way. Because the increase in the volume of the contents happens very fast, the eyelids and the bones are not able to adjust. So on the photos on the right, we see the very tight lids holding the left globe backward, holding the left globe in place. And on CT, all we see is straightening of the optic nerve. There's no remodeling of the bones going on there. So this patient had sudden blurring of vision, reduced to counting fingers from 2020, frozen globe, and an intraocular pressure of 38. So this patient has orbital compartment syndrome. So there's increased IOP, proxy measurement for increased orbital pressure, and there are signs of ischemia resulting in loss of function. So in the patient on the right, the septum and tarsus limit the amount of anterior displacement of the globe, and this causes the increase in the intraorbital pressure. So, what are the clinical features of OCS? Most patients will have nonspecific signs, so similar to other orbital diseases like proptosis, chemosis, limited motility, and resistance to retrodisplacement. So we see these symptoms in many patients like thyroid eye disease or cavernous hemangioma, or so they're a little nonspecific. So we should look for evidence to rule in OCS. We should look for evidence of high intraorbital pressure, such as tense and tight eyelids, which are difficult to pry open, and increased IOP. So the normal pressure normal intraorbital pressure is only around 3 to 6 millimeters mercury. But it is impractical to do orbital manometry in the clinical setting. And since whatever pressure in the orbit gets transmitted to the globe anyway, we can use intraocular pressure as a proxy measurement. So if the intraocular pressure is increased, we can assume that intraorbital pressure is likewise increased. So an IOP of 40 is a reasonable threshold to rule in OCS. So we should also look for evidence of ischemia and or loss of function. So in the posterior pole, the retina can be pale. There can be even signs like a cherry red spot. There can be absence of posterior pole vascular pulsation also. But in my experience, it's very hard to perform fundoscopy on a patient in much discomfort. So I try to look for more anterior signs and symptoms. So we can look for signs of damage to the optic nerve or compromise to the optic nerve, such as sluggish pupil or anisocoria, an RAPD. We can also look for vision changes. So a scotoma or visual field deficit, color vision changes. So the most common of which is desaturation of the red color. So that usually occurs first, and blurring of vision. So if the patient has these features, then we are justified in ruling in orbital compartment syndrome. So focused history taking can also help us identify the factors that can predispose patients to OCS. So I think the most frequent cause of OCS, although it's very rare, the most frequent cause is orbital hemorrhage, either from trauma or from surgery. So orbital surgery, eyelid surgery, surgery to the paranasal sinuses. So other causes include use of anticoagulants, fulminant orbital cellulitis. So I once had a patient with an aspergilloma that spread into the orbit. Within 24 hours, the patient lost vision. So very rapid orbital compartment syndrome. There can also be excessive orbital emphysema from a fracture. Fluid resuscitation, so extravasation of fluid from periorbital burns, retained foreign body, blood dyscrasias, and even extravasation of contrast. Like when patients undergo a cerebral angiogram, blood can leak into the orbit and cause orbital compartment syndrome. Retrobulbar or peribulbar anesthesia can cause OCS in two ways. So number one is making a vessel while the needle is in the orbit. And number two is infusion of too much anesthetic, too much fluid. So the normal volume of the orbit, as we know, is 30 cc, 30 milliliters. And if we take together the volume of the globe and the adnexal structures, that's already 26 to 27 milliliters already. So we only have a little wiggle room for injecting our lidocaine. So injecting too much saline or medications into the orbit can put patients at risk for OCS as well. So it's important to remember that orbital compartment syndrome is diagnosed clinically. So when I did the parang Google search for this topic when I was teaching the resident. So I found a very different approach in some Western countries. So where CT scans are immediately available. So imaging studies are a bonus if they can be performed very urgently. No? But the treatment for orbital compartment syndrome should never be delayed in favor of imaging study. So once you see a patient with proptosis, chemosis, and then there's high IOP and some form of loss of function, then we err on the side of caution because we are working against the clock. Perfusion of the optic nerve and the retina must be restored within 1 to 2 hours to decrease the chance of irreversible damage. And this deadline, this golden period, is even shorter when we have elderly patients. So we'll go through a case very quickly. So as an ophthalmologist, we can encounter orbital hemorrhages in the operating room as a complication of retrobulbar anesthesia, or we can also see them in trauma patients. So since this is like one of the unusual cases that we'll encounter, we'll use this as the sample case. So this patient was a patient of the Orbit Clinic in PGH. She had bilateral carotid cavernous fistula. She had been on follow-up at our clinic for around 3 to 4 months, just waiting for her schedule sa angiogram. So on that day, she followed up to be admitted for the angiography, cerebral angiography. So while she was waiting to be seen by me, by the consultant, she was waiting in the OPD. She experienced sudden eye redness, proptosis, tightness of the eyelids, and blurring of vision. And the globe, her left globe, became frozen. So she approached the residents, and the residents did their PE, and they noted increased IOP 38, VA of counting fingers, and frozen globe. So the residents referred to us, they correctly called it naman that it was compartment syndrome, and they proceeded to do lateral canthotomy and catalysis in the clinic. So sometimes as ophthalmologists, we see retrobulbar hemorrhage in evolution. Like while we're injecting our retrobulbar anesthesia, we see the globe slowly proptosing, the eyelids slowly, rapidly swelling. But sometimes we see them na kanina pa yung insult, hours ago. They come to the ER after mauling 8 hours ago, and you see the orbit is very tight. So management will differ a little bit. So we'll talk muna about when we see orbital compartment syndrome as it is developing. So when we are alerted to retrobulbar or peribulbar anesthesia and we see compartment syndrome in evolution, the first thing to do is manual decompression. So we know that there's something bleeding inside, and we want to tamponade that bleeder by maintaining firm pressure with our hands over maybe a cushion of gauze for at least over closed eyelids for at least 5 minutes. So that's the normal clotting time. So we'll allow whatever bleeder is in there to clot. So afterwards, we should check for the two signs that we are looking for: increased orbital pressure and loss of function or ischemia. So we should check for the IOP and ischemia. So we can check the pupils, may RAPD ba, anisocoric ba, and we can check for the three components of vision: acuity, field, and color. So if the patient has IOP less than 40 and no deficits, no optic nerve deficits, then this was just a case of retrobulbar hemorrhage, no compartment syndrome. The patient can be sent home on supportive treatment to prevent recurrence and hasten recovery. But this patient had an IOP of 38, had poor VA. So na-fulfill niya yung criteria natin for OCS. So the next step in management is to decompress this orbit. So if we talk about orbital decompression, we have to somehow increase the volume of the orbit so that the contents of the orbit have a little room to breathe. The arteries can have space to open and be perfused again. So if we recall the anatomy, the orbit is bound on four sides by bone. So it's very difficult to perform an urgent bony decompression at the OPD or at the ER. So the most logical boundary to approach is the anterior boundary, which is the septum and the tarsus and canthal tendon sling. So we want to open up that sling. We want to break that sling in order to make it lax, in order to increase the space for the globe to move forward and increase the space within the orbit. So, and hopefully that will be enough to allow the arteries to fill up again. So the procedure, as we know, is lateral canthotomy and canthelysis. But the canthotomy is just the step that allows you to do the canthelysis. The canthelysis is the crucial part that will allow the tarsus and eyelid to move forward. So this is something I've been doing with my residents. So when we talk about the procedure, we try to look for YouTube videos and critique, like we try to comment on what we would have done differently or what we prefer, what's possible in our setting. So I'll be presenting two videos from YouTube from Professor Melik. So this is, the first one is easy mode, lateral canthotomy and canthelysis. So as we know, lateral, okay, let's it's like 2 minutes. Let's just watch it first.
sometimes in an emergency setting, canthotomy and canthelysis is needed for orbital compartment syndrome. You can make an incision at the lateral canthus to split the superior crus and the inferior crus of the lateral canthal tendon with a blade, or with Westcott scissors, and cut down to the bone. A small incision is all that's needed. More likely in an emergency setting, the instrumentation is not going to be dainty and can end up looking more like this. Cutting right down toward the lateral periosteum. Next, the inferior crus is released. So right inside the skin, if you pick up on the lid margin, there's a tight attachment of the inferior crus, and low over the periosteum that can be incised. And you can note that the lid is now freely movable. This will release tension in the orbit and give space for arterial inflow and outflow. The superior crus can additionally be released if needed. In this case, we won't release this superior part.
All right. So that was like a very benign lateral canthotomy and canthalysis. So LCC is a common procedure that can be used. It's like a very versatile procedure. No, it's not just used to decompress the orbit. It can be used for eyelid surgeries, like during tarsal strip operations, during orbitotomies. You can start with lateral canthotomy and canthalysis. So for that video, what wasn't shown was the injection of anesthetic. So we usually give subcutaneous lidocaine or lidocaine with epinephrine. I've noticed that the conjunctival part isn't really anesthetized that well when you do a subcutaneous injection of lidocaine. So I usually soak a cotton pledget in lidocaine and epinephrine and hold it against the interior of the lateral canthus for around 2 to 3 minutes so that I'm sure that that part is anesthetized also. So like they said, usually the instruments that we use at the ER are not microsurgical instruments. So usually the ER set will consist of a DeBakey, a hemostat, METs. They're very big instruments. No? So, but they can be used naman for lateral canthotomy and canthalysis. So personally, what I do differently is I use a number 15 blade to do the incision. And then I complete it with tenotomy or METs. So I find that starting the incision with Westcott is really not very effective. The Westcott, especially if it's sharp tip, can pierce the conjunctiva, can even damage the globe if you're not careful. And I just find that I have more control with the blade 15. So that was like easy mode. So we'll move on to a more realistic hard mode, lateral canthotomy canthalysis. So this is another 2 minutes. We'll just watch for a little bit.
All right, you're gonna feel a little sting and a burn here, okay?
So your indications for the lateral canthotomy? Okay.
Yeah. Proptosis.
Okay.
So evidence of a retrovalvular hematoma with terminal vision.
That's that
1 cc.
At the same time, we gotta do it while there's another line, which are we, anybody call up to? Okay.
Oh.
And watch the pressure. And I'm gonna go ahead and trim.
We're sorry, I know that hurt.
I'm sorry, partner, we're almost done.
Take it out.
There.
From Ross, eh?
So,
No. Your ligament right there. So go ahead.
So what did you do differently from that?
Yes.
First of all, this was still actually
Still,
not quite cut all the way. So took scissors like that. Okay. You cut through, so you get the whole thing out, okay? Okay. And then you're gonna take the lower lid, and you're gonna grab it, you're gonna keep it tense up. And then you take your scissors and you feel for where the ligament is. You start cutting while you're pulling off of this. And when you cut the ligament, you'll feel like it will.
Okay, so that is a little close to my experience when I did cantotomy canthalisis for the first time as a first year resident. It was not a pleasant experience. So I found that when you're trying a procedure or studying a procedure, I found that I need to analyze what I don't like about it and try to find alternatives for that. So for LCC in retrobulbar hemorrhage, the part I hate the most is crushing the horizontal commissure, so using the hemostat. So if you do that, in theory, you will decrease the bleeding, make the cutting easier. But I also find that I get very tense because the patient is always in pain. Even if you infiltrate anesthetic, this part will always hurt. So I'm always rushing, always saying sorry, and trying to get it over and done with. And sometimes that doesn't result in a very good job. So that's why I prefer now to use number 15 blade and cut carefully with scissors. So it takes a little longer, it bleeds a little more, but if I have like a nurse to assist me, then it's doable for me. In this video, they said that they infiltrated 1 cc of lidocaine. Some surgeons go by a rule of ones, so inject 1 cc of lidocaine, clamp the horizontal commissure for 1 minute. So that's pretty long. 15 seconds is actually enough. And then cut 1 centimeter down. So that's a good like a guide, but you still have to check if your cantotomy and cantholysis was enough. So in this case, the resident said it wasn't really very mobile. So that's also a common thing I observed, like when the residents refer intraop to me, like they tell me, please check the cantholysis. I find that it's not, although they cut very deep, the lid is not very mobile. So we saw in the first video, diba, you can freely move the edge of the lower lid anteriorly and posteriorly. So that's the outcome that we want. So the goal of the cantholysis part is not really drainage of blood or evacuation of a hemorrhage. That can be a bonus, a secondary goal. But the main goal is to make the lower lid mobile because this will allow the globe to proptose further forward, and it will allow the interior of the orbit to breathe a little for the pressure to decrease. So again, for this part, he used the Westcott and very fine forceps. Usually use a 0.5 forceps or Adson, and Stevens or Metz. So one other problem when we do cantotomy and cantholysis in very proptose, very swollen orbits. There's always the threat na we might perforate the globe. We might cause a scleral laceration as we're cutting downward. So to avoid this, I sometimes place a freer if it's available, a small malleable, or something like a cotton bud between the scissors. So I insinuate the scissors, insinuate the bud, insinuate the scissors, and make sure I'm resting against something before I cut. So it's okay to cut in small increments as long as you get the job done. So this is another example of a patient with retrobulbar hemorrhage. So this patient arrived at the ER 8 hours after mauling. So at this point, we don't really need to do the manual decompression anymore because whatever was bleeding there kanina has stopped bleeding already. Natamponad na siya and nagclot na because of the length of time that has elapsed. So for this case, we can go straight to lateral cantotomy and cantholysis. So after that, so we'll go through some key points. No? So we discussed this already. Is manual decompression needed? It's only needed if you see that there's like active bleeding in that orbit or active expansion of the orbit. To cut or not to cut. So not all cases of swollen orbits are orbital compartment syndrome. So again, we have to check if there's increased IOP as a sign of increased orbital pressure. And number two, any sign of ischemia or loss of function. So what if the patient is unconscious? No, so we can't test function anyway. So for unconscious patients, the IOP is enough as a cutoff. So any IOP 40 or higher is a reasonable threshold to err on the side of caution and diagnose it as orbital compartment syndrome. So after we do the canthotomy and canthelysis, after we do the anterior decompression, how do we know if the decompression was enough? So we have to recheck the IOP. If it decreased a little bit, so let's say, for example, from 45, bumaba to 35, then we know that decompression was effective. We also have to look for some return of function. So there should be some improvement in vision, not immediately back to 2020, but at least a little improvement. And there can be motion of the pupils, improved motion of the pupils. RAPD will not go away very quickly, so that's not usually a benchmark for successful decompression. But the patient should have some improved motility, some improved motion, constriction of the pupils. All right. And then after that, what now? Post-procedure care. So can we still do, for example, we did the retrobulbar anesthesia and the retrobulbar hemorrhage, and we had to do canthotomy and canthelysis. Of course, we have to defer the OR. So what meds do we need to give our patients? I usually give an antibiotic because you've entered the orbit and you can cause orbital cellulitis if there's some contamination that went on during your procedure. So I give an antibiotic and steroid if admitted, or an NSAID if the patient's going to be sent home. So if admitted, I give dexamethasone IV. That's optional, but if malala yung maga, I find that it helps to rapidly resolve that inflammation, that swelling. For the outpatient meds, so the NSAID plus the antibiotic, I usually give a combination of coamoxiclav and celecoxib. So just because it's BID dosing and it's easier to be compliant with fewer doses of meds. So we also want to avoid any sudden increase in orbital pressure. So sneezing, coughing, retching, vomiting, straining for during defecation. So you can give supportive medications like anti-allergy pills, nasal spray like Salinase. You can give stool softeners, an antiemetic, whatever you think your patient is at risk for, then we have to be ahead of that in order to prevent repeat hemorrhage. So I realized that lateral canthotomy and canthelysis is a difficult procedure. No? So even if I've done my fair share of those, if you do it in the ER setting with a very tight orbit, it's still very stressful. So this is an alternative procedure. It's called the paracanthal one-step method. So it's basically a full thickness lid laceration. So you just cut to the lid margin down to the septum. So it does the job. It will open, it will rupture that tarsus and canthal tendon sling. It will open up the septum, so it will allow the globe to move forward. So of course, it doesn't look very elegant, but we just have to repair that lid laceration later on. The important thing is to restore perfusion in the orbit. So I think this is the end of my short talk, so I'll be happy to entertain any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Trina. Well, I just want to emphasize what Trina's given us. the first thing is that the early diagnosis of your OCS. Okay, that's more important, and the immediate management. You're given about 60 to 90 minutes of initial to save that eye, especially when you have already established the diagnosis of OCS. So yun ang importante sa lahat. So this is actually an emergency. It cannot be you cannot wait for this for 24 hours. No, you have to do it as soon as possible, especially if you're doing retrobulbar anesthesia in your OR, or more so in emergency cases, like, for example, orbital trauma. That's very important. And you should, as for the residents especially, you should be able to do a good cantolysis. Okay? So, any questions from the audience?
Sorry, sir. I forgot to add lang
Yeah, go
about the
ahead.
the cantotomy. So one of the usual questions ng residents is, should we suture? So we don't have to. So just
Yeah.
leave it. It will heal on its own. And the other question is, do we start anti-glow medications? So sometimes it's recommended to start an IV acetazolamide, which is not available here. So we have IV mannitol. The topicals like Timolol, Brimonidine, they really won't do much because it will take a few hours for it to have an effect and decrease the aqueous production. The mannitol to shrink the vitreous will have a temporary and small effect, but you might as well, if there's no contraindication, I mean, every little bit will help. No? So the mannitol should be available in the crash carts. So it's
Yeah.
the usual Glau dose.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, are there any questions from the audience, from the PLO consultants who are here? Anything to add? Or Christine, I think you're here.
Yes, hi,
Okay,
Gina. Thank you for making time. No, actually my question was regarding giving not really a question, but how would you approach for example if you would give acetazolamide, but since you just pahabol you were able to answer my question. So thank you for that. So I think I would give acetazolamide just to aid yung for that to lower more pressure, but maybe I would want to pose the question for maybe the GLAO section about their thoughts of giving brimonidine or glaucoma or eye pressure lowering agents in cases like this, since it takes time pa naman for it to recover. Rem or Mitzi?
Any opinion from the glaucoma consultants?
Hi, Doc.
Yan, si Michi. Okay, Mitch?
Basically, if you want an urgent, you want an urgent lowering of pressure. So, knowing the profiles of your medications and the degree of elevation that these patients usually have, which is very high, very acute, and a nerve that is not used to the chronic elevation. No? So you would like something that would act fast and something that will really have effect, immediate effect, no? Especially if you're still worried of a rebleed, no? So in knowing those things, the medications that you would use would what is available, again, Dr. Trina has mentioned, no, we do not have an IV acetazolamide.
Yeah.
What the medications that would have the most effect, the most immediate effect, and the most rapid effect will be your mannitol.
Okay.
You'll be treating it similar to a brain edema or an acute congestive glaucoma. So you want something that be acting. But then, of course, if you give mannitol, if your patients are on the elderly side, you have to watch out naman for cardiac problems. So yun ang drawback lang. So you have to make sure that the patient is well monitored if you're going to give something very strong. Kasi yung mga eye drops might not be that effective kaagad. By the time it takes effect, baka mabagsak na yung pressure. Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Go ahead, man.
patients are elderly and some of them will be on blood thinners. How do you manage that? Thank you.
Yes. So if the bleed has happened already, I still ask for cardio clearance before stopping the clopidogrel or aspirin, apixaban. I keep them on it until their cardiologist says it's okay. We just have to be more watchful. So the other things na pwede ma-avoid like the Valsalva, the coughing that can trigger a rebleed, yun na lang yung i-avoid. But I try to get cardio clearance first before I tell them to discontinue. Kasi diba it takes a few days naman for the effect to wane. So if I stop it now, meron pa rin naman effect sa bloodstream niya until tomorrow. So it's not really the instant effect that I want. Maybe I would add like a tranexamic acid instead of stopping blood thinners.
Pag nag-clearance ka, tapos na. Lampas
Hindi,
na
yun
yung
nga. So,
tagal
kunwari, di ba
tagal
sa
nila.
ER, oo, yes. So, sa
Oo.
ER naman, it's easy to refer to a cardio. And they will usually say, yes, okay, stop. So, yung mga iba lang kasi na, di ba, there are patients who have, let's say, heart disease, they're on aspirin like a prophylactic. So, usually they are cleared naman to stop the anticoagulants. It's just like for pre-op. But there are some patients, kuwari mga post-stroke, I'd be more cautious about discontinuing anticoagulants in their case. Kasi loss of vision is still not as bad as loss of life. Diba? So, what if ma-stroke siya dahil tinigil ko yung anticoagulant? So, unfortunately, there's no way to get an RCT on this, like really robust evidence on this, kasi parang unethical yung magiging design nun. But in my experience lang, I try to get cardio opinion.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Christine, you have additional question?
Yun na po. Thank you. Yeah,
Any
thanks.
questions from the residents? Do you have any questions?
Doctor, I have a question po. I'm Dr. Roa po. After decompression, Doc, do you have a target IOP na you'd say na at this point you'd be fine na to let it be?
So I just want the IOP below 40. So if IOP is above 40, then it's likely that the orbital pressure is high enough to decrease the perfusion. So anything below 40. So sometimes yung nagiging problem is, diba, in GLAW, we don't want a precipitous drop in IOP. So what if yung initial IOP niya was 60? So I can decrease it by, let's say, 30%. So that's 20. So 40 pa rin yun. Medyo mataas pa rin. So medyo you can aim for gradual, so 40, tas pababain mo pa ng konti in the succeeding hour. That can be the goal. But usually for RBH, the pressures range from mga 40s to 50s lang naman. So if you aim for a 30% drop, you're well within the less than 40 range.
Thank you, Doc.
Question? Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yes, Doctor.
Hey, di ba pag meron tayong what's this, anterior chamber hemorrhage, and then we monitor for recurrence, do you
Yes.
have any recurrence actually after you yeah,
Yes.
how do
Yeah, so very good. So that was actually the outcome of the case that I shared. So, di ba, retrobulbar hemorrhage siya sa left eye, and then they did a cantotomy canthalisis. And after a few minutes, actually, Dr. Rapean and I arrived at the clinic. And when we were writing the plan na she should have the angiography done na ASAP, sent to ER, etc., nag-retrobulbar hemorrhage din yung other eye. So we did a cantotomy canthalisis again in the clinic. So at that time, the BP was 260 over 100 something. So it was a hypertensive emergency. So we had the patient brought to the ER. So what happened? Because of the time, there was a continuous source of bleeding in the left side. So even if nag-cantotomy canthalisis na, meron pa ring bleeder that's actively delivering blood into that closed space. So actually, nag-compartment syndrome ulit yung left eye after the canthotomy and cantholisis. And at that point, we had no other recourse because we already did the decompression. So medical management na lang. So the long-term outcome for that patient was good vision on the right, but very poor vision on the left. So there was irreversible damage na. So there is a possibility of rebleed. So again, we try to look at the risk factors of the patient. So yan, elderly, on anticoagulants, etc. So we just try to decrease the risk. So no strenuous activity, teach them to do manual decompression immediately if they feel discomfort in their orbit. And usually I keep them for maybe 24 hours observation at the ER. So kasi kung magre-rebleed yan, it will occur in the next few hours. So it's different from, I think, from, di ba, kunwari, anterior chamber, and then the clot, it's parang it's lysis of the clot, and then there will be space enough for a rebleed. But in the orbit, I think, because there's a continuous source. So parang ruptured aneurysm kasi yung naging source nun sa patient. So there's a continuous source of blood.
Okay, any more questions? Thank you, Trina. Any more questions from the residents, from the other consultants? Well, I think there's none. So I'd like to thank again Trina for delivering a very informative lecture, especially for the general ophthalmologists and for our residents, no? At least they have additional armamentarium or some kind of skill that they can learn when they're in their practice, especially if you encounter any emergency cases, like especially in trauma. Okay? Thank you very much, Trina. So again, sabaw ulit ito, Trina.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Trina.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. We really appreciate your accepting our invitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Doc Trina.
Thank you po, Doc.
Okay. Rem, do you have any announcement? Thank you.
None for today, Doc.